News Central now at this hour begins in the west of the continent, where the Central Bank of Nigeria has appointed new executive directors to oversee the affairs of Polaris, Union and Keystone Banks. This came a few hours after dissolving the board of directors governing the deposit money banks. The Apex Bank, in a statement signed by the acting director of corporate communications, Sidi Hakama, released on Thursday morning, said the appointment takes immediate effect. According to the statement, Yetunde Oni, the first female CEO of the Standard Chartered Bank in Sierra Leone, was appointed as the chief executive officer of Union Bank, while Mannir Ubali Ringim was selected as the executive director of the Tier 2 bank. For Keystone Bank, Hassan Imam was appointed as its chief executive officer, while Chioma Mang got the position of executive director. Also, the bank appointed Lawal Mudathir Omokayode Akintola as the chief executive officer of Polaris Bank and Chris Ofikulu as its executive director. In Nigeria's northeast, Borno State Governor Babagana Zulum has signed the 2024 appropriation bill of 358.7 billion naira passed by the State House of Assembly with an adjustment amounting to 18.1 billion naira. With the increase in budget size, the revised capital expenditure now stands at over 208.4 billion naira, while the revised recurrent expenditure is 150.4 billion naira. The revised appropriation bill was presented by the Speaker of the State House of Assembly, Abdul Karim Lawang, to the governor at the Council Chamber of the Government House in Maiduguri on Wednesday. The governor expressed optimism regarding the potential impact of the appropriation bill, emphasizing that with capital expenditure standing at 208.7 billion naira, it is designed to provide dividends of democracy to the people of the state. Now to court matters. 11 new Supreme Court justices will be sworn in next week. As requested by President Bola Tinubu, the Senate approved the 11 judges in December 2023. The justices billed for swearing in are Honorable Justice Jummai Hannatu Sankey, OFR, North Central, Honorable Justice Stephen Jonah Ada, North Central, Honorable Justice Muhammad Baba Idris, Northeast, Honorable Justice Haruna Simons Amani, Northeast, Honorable Justice Jamilu Yamma Matukur, Northwest, Honorable Justice Abubakar Sadiq Umar, Northwest, Honorable Justice Chidiebere Nwaoma Uwa, Southeast, Honorable Justice Chioma Egondu Nwosu Iheme, Southeast, Honorable Justice Obande Festus Ogbunya, Southeast, Honorable Justice Mo Asemo A. Adumain, South-South, Honorable Justice Habib Adewale O. Abiru, Southwest, and when sworn in, the Apex Court will have the full complement of 21 justices as stipulated in the Constitution. Staying with court matters, the Supreme Court has reserved judgment for the appeals challenging the election of the Abia State Governor Alex Otti of the Labour Party after taking arguments from the legal team of the People's Democratic Party and the ruling All Progressives Congress. At the proceedings held in Abuja, counsels to the opposition APC and the PDP in the state asked the court to set aside an earlier judgment of the lower court, which absolved Otti from allegations of not being a member of the Labour Party. The Apex Court also dismissed the appeal filed by the opposition Social Democratic Party and its candidate Umar Ardo, seeking to overturn the victory of Governor Amadou Fintiri of Adamawa State. Marvelous Obomanu reports.
The Supreme Court entertained two appeals, one seeking to overturn the Adamawa State governorship election and the other by both the People's Democratic Party and the ruling All Progressives Congress, challenging the emergence of the Abia State governor as the candidate of the party. The Court of Appeal, sitting in Lagos State, had earlier dismissed the appeals filed by the APC and the PDP, saying that they did not produce substantive evidence to prove that Governor Otti was not a member of the Labour Party or that the lawful votes scored were forged.
It used to be that one local government in that state used to determine who is the governor. But this time around, the jinx was broken because the attempt to use the same methodology, actually the strategy failed. We hope the Supreme Court would put a final lead on that strategy that has been used before to undo the people's will. But for now, we keep our fingers crossed. It's a question of resolving XDP 38 and SP 188, all of which came from the same party. And one shows that our clients got a clear 174,000 as against their own hold 84,000. And whether the result that was not stamped, that was signed by a ward agent, representing to be local government agent, will suffice to overturn it. So let's keep that, and we pray for their lordship for God's wisdom.
Meanwhile, the case concerning the polls in Adamawa State, northeast Nigeria, was also heard by the court. The legal counsel to the nation's electoral body says that the appeal filed by the Social Democratic Party was unnecessary and based on fallacy.
The Supreme Court, they've just shown that the appeal is more or less an academic exercise. And at the end of the day, INEC should be commended for what it has done. Because for you to go to court and say that up to the apex court, you must have a genuine grievance that your rights have actually been affected and substantially affected. Just like you saw, they said, how many votes did you score and whatever it is. The right may be there, but how will it change the equilibrium? What of the issue of constitutional spread and all those things? And I think we must commend them too for having the courage to withdraw it. Because for me, it's not every case that should come to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court should be a policy court and the final court. But it's not every kind of grievance that should come to the Supreme Court.
After hearing the arguments by the various parties for Adamawa State, the appeal by the Social Democratic Party was dismissed, while judgment was reserved by the Supreme Court for the matter concerning Alex Oti of Abia State. In Abuja for News Central, Marvelous Oboman.
Let's also tell you that the Supreme Court of Nigeria will deliver judgments in 7 governorship appeals on Friday, January 12, 2024, beginning 9 a.m. The states are Lagos, Kano, Zamfara, Plateau, Ebonyi, Bauchi, and Cross River. Now, in the case involving Yusuf versus Gowna, recall in late December that the Apex Court reserved judgment in the appeal filed by the Kano State Governor Abba Yusuf, challenging the verdict of the Court of Appeal and the State Election Petitions Tribunal, which removed him from office. The 5-member panel, led by Justice John Okoro, reserved the judgments after the parties adopted their brief of arguments. Similarly, for Mutfwang versus Goshe, on January 9, 2024, the Supreme Court reserved judgment in the appeal filed by the Governor of Plateau State, Caleb Mutfwang, seeking to overturn the verdict of the Court of Appeal, which nullified his election. A 5-member panel of justices led by Justice John Okoro reserved judgment after hearing arguments from parties for and against the appeal. And then we have the case between Lawal versus Matawale. Last November, the appeal court nullified the election of Zamfara State Governor Dauda Lawal. Lawal of the main opposition PDP was declared the winner of the March 18 governorship election in a shocking victory that dislodged then-incumbent Bello Matawale of the All Progressives Congress. He polled a total of 377,726 votes. Matawale scored 311,976 votes. Muhammad versus Abubakar, also in November, the appellate court affirmed the victory of Governor Bala Mohammed of Bauchi State in the March 18 governorship election. The appeal was filed by the All Progressives Congress governorship candidate Sadiq Abubakar following the tribunal judgment upholding Mohammed's victory. Now in southwest Nigeria, it's Sanwo-Olu versus GRV versus Jandor, and the appeal court in Lagos in November affirmed the judgment of the tribunal, confirming the return of Babajide Sanwo-Olu and Obafemi Hamzat as the governor and deputy governor of Lagos State. The justices of the Court of Appeal, in a unanimous decision, dismissed the appeal of the People's Democratic Party and the Labour Party for lack of merit. And then it's Nwifuru versus Odi. The Supreme Court had on Tuesday reserved judgment in the Ebonyi State governorship election appeal. Last November, the Court of Appeal in Lagos had affirmed the election of APC's Francis Nwiforu as the duly elected governor of Ebonyi State in the March 18 governorship election. All right, now to speak to us on the swearing in of the Nigerian judicial system. But before we do that, Justice Jude Onwegwueze of Nigeria's Federal Capital Territory High Court in Apo on Thursday granted bail to former Nigerian Minister of Power and Steel, Olu Ogunloye, in the sum of 50 million naira. Ogunloye was arraigned on 7 counts bordering on fraudulent award of a contract and official corruption on Wednesday. Now, the judge had ordered his remand in Kuje Correctional Center pending hearing and ruling on the bail application. Now, moving the application, the counsel for the former minister, Adeola Adedipe, prayed the court to grant bail to his client by way of self-recognizance or in liberal terms. He said Ogunloye is not a flight risk and that the notion canvassed by the prosecution was born out of misconception and communication barrier. Adedipe also appealed to the court not to order the use of a public servant as surety for his client. Now, delivering the ruling, Justice Onwegwueze said the pendulum of the court swings in favor of granting bail to the defendant. All right, now to speak to us on the swearing in of 11 new Supreme Court justices, which will be happening next week, we have joining us in the news Inibehe Efyong, and he is a legal practitioner. Hello, Inibehe. Thank you so much for joining me on the news this evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
All right, so taking a look at, this swearing in of 11 justices by next week, what criteria or qualifications were considered, or would you say were considered by the president, and also the Senate in the selection and also the approval of these 11 justices?
Essentially, what the Constitution demands is that a person to be appointed as a justice of the Supreme Court, that person must have practiced as a legal practitioner for a period not less than, I think, 15 years or so. However, that is not really what happens in practice, or that is not what has happened over the years. The principle that has been set by the National Judicial Council essentially is that you have what is called the elevation, what I would call the elevation process, which is that a lawyer is appointed to the High Court, either the Federal High Court or the State High Court, or the National Industrial Court, or the High Court of the Federal Capital Territory, and then that lawyer becomes a judge at that level. Subsequently, the judge is then elevated to a justice of the Court of Appeal. From the Court of Appeal, a justice can further be elevated to the Supreme Court. So we've had this elevation process over the years. We don't really have, we've not had lawyers being appointed directly from the bar to the appellate bench. So for you to be a justice of the Supreme Court today, you will have to be a justice of the Court of Appeal. So my lords who have just been appointed to fill the vacant seats at the Supreme Court are all justices of the Court of Appeal who have been deemed worthy and who have been deemed qualified in the opinion and based on the assessment of the President, the National Judicial Council, and the Senate. That is the way it works. But again, constitutionally, the discretion and the decision of the president is limited, because what the NJC does is that it essentially just recommends the list of that is required. They don't usually most times give the president a discretion. So if there are 5 vacancies, they will just usually recommend 5 justices to the president, who will in turn submit their names to the Senate for approval. So that is the way it works in practice.
will reach its constitutional limit of 21 justices. And even that 21, a lot of people seem to think that, that is quite a number. So how do you think the increased number of justices will influence the efficiency and the effectiveness of the judicial decision-making process within the Supreme Court?
It's not going to have, well, it will have some impacts, but it's not going to be fundamental. The problem is not the number of justices. 21 number is actually a sufficient number. The problem is the nature of appeals that goes to the Supreme Court. We need to revisit the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court currently takes appeal even on tenancy matters. If I have a quarrel with my landlord, right, or my landlord has a quarrel with me, or I can just simply go to the magistrate court. From the magistrate court, I will go to the High Court. From the High Court, we can go to the Court of Appeal up to the Supreme Court. And we have had tenancy matters that were litigated for years up to the Supreme Court, which is totally unnecessary, which is unheard of. It's completely unheard of in more advanced jurisdictions. In the United States, for example, before you can even appeal to the Supreme Court, they will scrutinize, the criteria, the threshold is very high. Look at even the Trump immunity clause case that was, the Supreme Court of the U.S. has, decided to look into, where the special counsel went to the Supreme Court to try to have the Supreme Court take the matter. The Supreme Court still referred it back to the Court of Appeal, their own Court of Appeal, to look at it. So at that level, in the United States and other countries, before the Supreme Court entertains any appeal, that appeal must raise very strong and fundamental constitutional questions. You don't just appeal on anything. But in Nigeria, you have right of appeal from every final decision basically of the Court of Appeal. Not just on questions of law, but even on questions of facts. So you find all sorts of appeals. And that is why the Punch newspaper did a report titled Supreme Court Update Cases, right? I have a client who had an appeal at the Supreme Court for over 20 years. I inherited the case. Eventually, quite unfortunately, the man died, and his appeal was never determined in his lifetime. Meanwhile, he had won at the Court of Trial, first instance, won at the Court of Appeal, but died before the Supreme Court could even have an opportunity to see his face. This is despite that there were motions filed for accelerated hearing, despite that medical reports were exhibited to show that he was approaching the end of his life, but the Supreme Court still couldn't take his appeal.
All right,
and that is a lot of most Nigerians.
If you can hear
me, the point is that while I commend the appointment,
if you can hear me, Inibehe. Yes, well, taking a look at the portfolio of this soon-to-be Supreme Court justices, now, can you shed light on any notable legal or judicial backgrounds of the newly appointed Supreme Court justices? And also, how do you think their expertise or experience will contribute to the diversity and expertise of the overall judicial system in Nigeria?
Well, I know that the learned justices of the Supreme Court that have been appointed, they have different backgrounds, and they will bring their own diverse experiences to bear in their adjudication. Nigerians want to trust the judicial process. Nigerians want to have confidence, right, in our courts. At that level, yes, the Supreme Court is not infallible, but the integrity of our apex court should never be questioned. It should never be a subject of social media debate. When the Supreme Court gives a decision, whether rightly or wrong, citizens should trust that decision that it is given in the best interest of the people. So I am hoping that my lords will also bring their experience to bear, and that even the current justices, will begin to reflect on how to regain public trust. We can't pretend about it. The reality today is that Nigerians have very little faith in the judiciary. And even me as the lawyer, I have my own even constraint. And I'm saying that as someone who is also a victim of the Nigerian judiciary, having been wrongly, sent to prison for a month for no just cause. So I know that we must reform our justice system, and I believe the Supreme Court has to set the tone for that, particularly in political matters, which is the area that has really agitated the minds of the public. It is important for the Supreme Court maybe to begin to explore the possibility of taking a different direction in terms of how to address the public perception. I'm not saying the Supreme Court should listen to public sentiment. I'm saying that the Supreme Court is established to serve the Nigerian people and the public. Therefore, every institution in the country, including the judiciary, should be interested in earning the trust and the confidence of the people. And I am hoping that, within the judiciary, from the Supreme Court to even the magistracy, that we practitioners and my lords, at the appellate level and at the high courts, will reflect on these things.
Thank you so much, Inibehe, for joining me at this time and speaking on this. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, so with that, we'll take a quick break, and when we return, News Central Now continues. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us on News Central Now. Now, to further discuss the issue of the illegal acquisition of 3 banks, talking about Union Bank, Polaris Bank, and Keystone Bank, and also the sack of its board of directors and the appointment of new executives. We actually have joining us in the news this evening, Gospel Obele, and he's the chief economist at Streetnomics Limited. Hello, Gospel. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, hello. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the time.
All right, so can you share your thoughts on the factors that led to the CBN's decision to dissolve the boards of directors, governing Polaris, Union, and Keystone banks? What ethical compliance or compliance standards did the board of directors violate in this case?
Well, in the first case, the central bank has been out for improved compliance. It was one of the major thematic areas that the governor had stated, late into 2023, that the central bank would really deep dive into. Also being the fact that lots of banks were emerging as really unhealthy in terms of non-performing loans and many other, thematic areas that threaten the growth and development of the industry. And it was on the grounds, on the back of that those compliance efforts and investigations were led. And of course, leading to what we have today in terms of the detail as to which banks, were found wanting, and the move to sort of, hold the board of directors as well responsible.
All right, now speaking on the, standards that were violated, how do you think these would actually be enforced to prevent similar occurrence in future?
Well, I think it's more or less the central bank, and in partnership with the commercial banks, tightening up compliances and ensuring the internal controls are really enforced, and checks and reviews are being done before board members have been appointed. There has to be a path to sort of reviewing, and verifying the appointments in the commercial banks, and also checkmating activities of board members, CEOs, and executive directors within commercial banks. These things are very critical because these institutions are custodians of deposits of monies of Nigerians, and we all know the situation which many Nigerians are in right now regarding the cost of living crisis and all that. So, in a bid to sort of present and ensure that the commercial banks remain as trustworthy institutions to work and bank with, then the central bank needs to enforce new compliance standards, internal control risk, and also setting up disciplinary measures to ensure that there are yardstick to sort of hold executives responsible by.
All right. So now speaking on the repercussions of the, executives, that's the board of directors that were, dissolved. Do you know if there are any legal repercussions or any legal charges that they might be facing in any way? And what penalties do you think they might incur for their actions?
Well, quite honestly, I am not aware of anyone now because it's beyond my purview of work as an economist. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, Gospel, if you can tell us, how do the newly appointed executive directors, how do they bring relevant experience or even expertise to their respective roles in the banks? How would you expect them and the bank leadership to rebuild trust and ensure transparency, especially in their operations?
Well, when it takes time to rebuild trust and transparency, take into consideration what has already happened. But then again, these things are to a very large extent, very possible to rebuild, especially when it comes to working with Nigerians. There's always room for a second chance. And the context to, number one, these are institutions that have been there done that for a long time, especially Union Bank. But the big ticket question is what activities will be put in place to rebuild trust. So I think executive leadership in partnership with other employees in the organization have to work harder, to encourage consumers to keep banking with them, and also to assure them that their funds or their monies are safe in context. Also, it's really critical to note that more marketing campaigns that has to do with explaining the brand core, the core values, the core ideologies, and separating them from past individuals who may have violated them is also critical to win back public trust. One or two banks on the list have over time had issues regarding this form of ethical compliance and the stability in its leadership. So it's not the first time. My worry is that we seem to have lots of banks within the banking system that are really unhealthy for the overall growth of the financial sector as a thriving ecosystem, an important central ecosystem to the growth and development of Nigerian economy. So, however, I would sort of encourage banks to look internally and revisit its ethos, and then have a strong value proposition drive / marketing campaign approach to winning back consumers strategically over a period of time, that is.
All right, so Gospel, you did say that, one of the things that these banks can actually do to, rebuild trust is to encourage the customers to keep banking with them. But, some of the people that a lot of people don't even seem to talk about, very important ones, are the stakeholders themselves, the shareholders, the customers, the employees themselves. How do you think their interest would be protected in the aftermath of this, I don't want to call it a scandal?
Well, yeah, it's quite worrisome, in the first place to take cognizance of that, which is why I would expect that the central bank has to evolve in its role beyond just a regulator to ensure that stakeholders within the banking system are also protected, in context to the changes and compliance standards that are being executed as the stands, So it has to really, become a 360-degree approach, just as we say that new executive leaders within these banks have to revisit the ethos and ensure that they sort of come forward and leverage the good standing they have with consumers to win back trust. The central bank also has to, come forward to sort of support these banks, to support the stakeholders within these banks. My worry is that probably much of due diligence is not currently being done in terms of reviewing the current state of each of these banks. Some of these banks are actually really, really unhealthy, and there will be very deep-seated issues internally beyond just, changing the board and all that. So how do you manage all those excesses in context to the need to protect critical stakeholders who are, engaging with these institutions? So that there is need to also de-risk these processes again and again, which is part of the major monetary outlook for the year 2024 that the central bank governor is giving to. So we hope that processes and systems will be rightly put in place to execute them to the fullest.
All right, so just before we go, Gospel, can you tell us, let's talk about the regulators and also the government now, that's the government authorities. How do you think that they should respond moving forward to these illegal acquisitions of banks, especially from public holders? And what broader implications do you think this particular, incident would have, in the banking industry?
Well, to be quite fair, these narratives are not just peculiar to Nigerian banks or to just banks in the Nigerian ecosystem. I think it's also widespread, also being the fact that systematically we've been morally bankrupt on many grounds. Not to say there are any white or black case scenario, but there are a lot of things that are fundamentally wrong with how sectors have been structured, how institutional players are evolving in those sectors, and nobody's checking. There are no compliance standards. Nobody's holding anybody responsible for anything. So we need to then evolve into an ideology that helps us hold ourselves responsible. So until that strategic foundational reasoning is in place, I don't think we'll be ever come to a point where we are being able to hold each other accountable and also able to raise standards to protect stakeholders, Nigerians, and the overall ecosystem. So what I said all that to say is there's also a likelihood in the future that these events may reoccur. Even if the central bank tries to tighten its ecosystem properly, again, not enough due diligence is currently happening within the Nigerian financial ecosystem. So there's still so much of leakages and loopholes. So we strongly encourage that there has to be a revisit of the ideology to start with, and again encouraging a critical stakeholder mass approach to ensuring that we imbibe ideologies that help our institutions play safer and become truly prosperous in the last scheme of things. Knowing fully well that it's not really a one-size-fits-all approach.
All right, Gospel, thank you so much for joining me at this time and for taking
time
out of your busy schedule to speak on this.
Really grateful for your understanding. Thank you again.
Coming up after the break, Sierra Leone dismisses 48 soldiers for attempted coup. We'll bring you more on this when we return. Do stay. Thank you for staying with us. Now, the Republic of Sierra Leone Armed Forces has dismissed 48 personnel with 27 facing 88 count charges following the attempted coup in Sierra Leone. The Director of Communication and Public Relations Officer of the Ministry of Defense, Colonel Issa Bangura, provided details on the situation. Colonel Bangura stressed that the involved military personnel had breached ethical standards outlined in a code of conduct. Now, the Ministry of Defense strictly prohibits serving military officers from engaging in illegal military networks or participating in political discourse that could endanger peace and cohesion. Guinea's foreign minister has told foreign diplomats that curbs on internet access in the West African country were needed because of a security problem. Around 15 ambassadors or representatives, including from the European Union, the United States and China, met Morisanda Kouyaté to voice concerns. They raised restrictions on freedom of expression and internet access, a fuel shortage following a devastating fire at the main depot in December, and obstacles facing their teams. For several weeks, access to internet has been severely limited in Guinea, which has been ruled by military leaders who came to power in a 2021 coup. Authorities have also imposed restrictions on non-official media, with social networks and private radio stations cut off, news websites interrupted or suspended, and journalists assaulted or arrested. The Human Rights Watch has released its Human Rights Watch World Report 2024, citing human rights abuse, especially in southern African countries like Eswatini, South Africa, Lesotho, and Zimbabwe. Historically, these countries have faced political instability and issues related to freedom of expression, association, and equal participation. The report reveals that there is high cases of government suppressing opposition voices, clamping down on civic spaces, and restricting independent journalism. The African National Congress's legal representatives have written to the creator of the Umkhonto weSizwe political party, requesting that it stops using the MK name and logo of FAY's legal action. When the MK party registered with the Independent Electorate Commission in September, former President Jacob Zuma pledged his support for it in the 2024 general elections. The ANC claims that the name is a trademark of the now defunct Umkhonto weSizwe War Veterans section of the party. Earlier, legal expert Mpumelelo Zikalala spoke to us from Durban, South Africa on this development.
So in this case, the ANC is saying we do have a Umkhonto weSizwe name that is registered. Yes, it is an NPO, a political school, according to us. But that means that whoever that wants to use that particular name has got to come to us first. seek permission and that permission can be granted. The second one is through common law. Yes, even though it is unwritten, but it is through standard practice and also South African case law that if a name is known, available or identifiable to an individual, that particular individual would have ownership to it. Utilization of the name without seeking permission, that means that you have contravened common law, and the person that has been aggrieved, in this case the ANC, can go to court and seek reprieve and say, here's a person passing off as if they are associated with the ANC when they are not. So in assessing, the court is then going to say, let's look at historical context of the name of Mkhonto Wesizwe. Did it survive maybe 3 years ago? If it did, what was the context which was associated with the name? Now, if we look at the history of the ANC and the name of Mkhonto Wesizwe, which has always survived, the only thing that has taken place is it has changed its name from Mkhonto Wesizwe to the military veterans, which is a name which is recognizable within the ANC constitution. So if you can't separate the two, then it would mean that the court might find in favor of the ANC and say, yes, this is a name which was utilized by you, hence it can't be utilized for anybody else. The Congress of the People were victorious because the court then said, there's nothing which links the Congress of the People to the ANC. So the name existed as an event name and not a specific name identifiable within the constitution of the ANC, or it can't be confused as if it belongs to the ANC. Again, there was another dispute with Action SA and I think also with the African National Congress, and that particular dispute was also resolved. So there's been a number of disputes that go on within the South African courts pertaining to the names which are going to be there. Again, with the ANC, there's another political party which is called the AIC, similar to the ANC. And the AIC was victorious in that one because it said, you do not own the name African. It belongs to everybody else and they have the right to utilize it. But the uniqueness of this case is that there is something that exists within the records of the ANC which might stand to bolster their case if they go to court to say, this is a name which is associated with us. You can't say Mkhonto Wesizwe is associated with the ANC.
Well, that was legal expert Mpumelelo Zikalala, who spoke to us from Durban, South Africa. Now, moving away, voters in Comoros will choose a new president on Sunday with incumbent Azali Assoumani, who has already extended his time in office through constitutional change, voicing confidence of winning a third consecutive term against a divided opposition. Nearly 340,000 people are eligible to vote in the predominantly Muslim Indian Ocean archipelago, whose population is under 1 million. Several opposition figures have urged voters to boycott the ballot, in which 5 candidates are standing against 65-year-old Assoumani for the top job. Since winning re-election in 2016, former Army Chief of Staff Colonel Assoumani, who currently holds the rotating chair of the African Union, has thrown opponents in jail or forced them into exile. Still in Comoros, Mohamed Doudou, leader of the Orange Party and candidate in the upcoming Comoros presidential election, has held his final rally in Moroni before the vote begins on Sunday. Doudou, who was Interior Minister under incumbent President Azali Assoumani between 2016 and 2021, has pledged to unify the country, describing Comoros as torn apart. Doudou's orange-clad supporters believe he's going to do something about corruption and improve education for all Comorians.
Yabadili wawiji wahema shababi watofanya hasi monti yabadili wa ulevi yashanje mahakama basi na yangu Josephine amiswir
the education mana umsomo ndao nai aliziona wala presi joanza badilizo za homsomo aya sise zindru mana ça va pas zirupia ziheya c'est pas bien zironga zendaona voilà.
Il fait le pays réconcilier les Comoriens parce que notre pays est déchiré. Ça c'est le plus important. Réunir tout le monde autour de la table, faire venir les exilés et ensemble nous allons travailler ensemble pour mettre en œuvre un programme parce que c'est un programme solide qui répond aux aspirations des Comoriens et à leurs préoccupations.
In East Africa, the International Organization for Migration says it has stepped up cash-based assistance to more than 4,488 vulnerable returnees and internally displaced persons fleeing the fighting in Sudan into South Sudan. The IOM said the assistance, backed by a $5 million grant from the International Monetary Fund, aims to address urgent basic needs like food, transportation, shelter, and sanitation, and it also contributes to an increase in household savings that will help the family's resettlement. According to IOM, Acting Chief of Mission in South Sudan, John McHugh, the conflict in Sudan has affected the already fragile economic outlook of South Sudan. More than 480,000 individuals have fled from Sudan to South Sudan since the outbreak of fighting in Sudan on April 15, 2023. Still ahead on the news, Turkey, Bulgaria, Romania signed Black Sea demining deal. We'll tell you more on this after the break. Do join us again. Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. Now, NATO members Turkey, Bulgaria and Romania on Thursday joined forces and signed an agreement on demining the Black Sea to ensure safe waters after Russia's war in Ukraine. The Russian Navy mined Ukraine's Black Sea coastline in the early stages of its invasion nearly 2 years ago. Some of the mines have since washed up in the waters of the three countries, endangering shipping and complicating Ukraine's efforts to break through a Russian naval blockade. Now, top defense officials from Turkey, Bulgaria and Romania signed a memorandum of understanding in Istanbul establishing the Mine Countermeasures Naval Group in the Black Sea, that's the MCM Black Sea, which will oversee demining operations. Romanian Defense Minister Angher Tilva and Bulgaria's Deputy Defense Minister Atanas Zaprianov joined their Turkish counterpart Yasar Güler at a military residence overlooking the Bosphorus for the signing ceremony.
Bu çerçevede ülkemiz bölgesel sahiplik ilkesi doğrultusunda Karadeniz'deki dengeyi sağlayan ve bölgenin güvenliği konusunda büyük önem arz eden Montreux Boğazlar Sözleşmesi'ni dikkatle, sorumlu ve tarafsız bir biçimde uygulamakta. Diğer yandan savaşın başlaması ile birlikte Karadeniz'de sürüklenen mayınlardan dolayı oluşan risk ve tehditleri ortadan kaldırmak için kıyıdaş müttefiklerle işbirliğini geliştirmektedir. Ülkemizin öncülüğünde
Now in business, the world added 50% more renewable energy capacity in 2023 than the previous year, and this is according to the International Energy Agency, IEA. This is the fastest growth rate in the past 2 decades and the 22nd year in a row that renewable capacity additions set a record. However, the IEA insists more is needed in the battle against climate change. The rise was given by China, the planet's biggest emitter of greenhouse gases. Meanwhile, the IEA warns that the world is not on pace to reach the goal of tripling renewable capacity by 2030, a target agreed by nearly 200 nations at the UN's COP28 climate summit in Dubai last month. Now in the world of sports, Umar Sadiq is a major doubt for Nigeria's 2023 Africa Cup of Nations opening match with the Nzalang National of Equatorial Guinea. Now Sadiq did not train with the rest of the squad at the École Nationale de la Police on Wednesday night. Now the Real Sociedad striker, who had a strap-in around his leg, had to be attended to by the team's physio. Head coach Jose Pesero hopes he recovers in time for the clash against Equatorial Guinea. Victor Osimhen is currently the only fit striker at Pesero's disposal at the moment. The other 2 strikers in the team, Kelechi Iheanacho and Terem Murphy, are expected to join their teammates in camp this weekend. Bayer Leverkusen have announced that their Nigerian international striker, Victor Boniface, will begin rehabilitation on his groin injury after undergoing a successful surgery. The announcement was made on social media platform X. Leverkusen had earlier announced that the player would be out of action until April. The injury forced Boniface out of Nigeria's 2023 AFCON squad and was replaced by Terem Murphy on Tuesday after he sustained the injury during their training camp in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. Boniface is Leverkusen's top scorer, bagging 16 goals across all competitions in just his first season at the club. He made his international debut in October 2023 and has since earned 4 caps for Nigeria. He has been instrumental to Xabi Alonso's side, who are surprised Bundesliga leaders and vying for their first ever league title, having finished as runners-up 5 times in the past. They currently sit first in first place on the table with 42 points after 16 matches and faced Augsburg in an away match this weekend. And that's all at this hour. But before we go, let's take another look at some of our top stories. We told you that new executives named for 3 Nigerian commercial banks. We also told you that African National Congress takes Zuma-backed MK party to court ahead 2024 polls. And finally, you heard that Comoros President Assoumani seeks 3rd-term re-election bid. Send your eyewitness report to the WhatsApp number on the screen. Do follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, StarTimes channel 274, Avo TV, and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I'm Darshan Usman.